There we go. So we wanted to, I'm going to just talk for about 10 minutes about the basis of design and some shared documents that we've created with our Living Shorelines project at Giant Marsh. Emily and Jeremy, can you see my full slide correctly?
Yes.
Okay, okay, good.
Yeah.
So ESA, I certainly want to highlight ESA. Michelle Orr, Damian Coons, and others have been very involved in the engineering for the Giant Marsh Living Shorelines project and helped to spearhead our basis of design document. Apologies that this picture ended up on my text here, but this document has been really key for our full project team to use for discussion as we develop the design basis for the Living Shorelines projects, and then also capturing decisions on our main components and considerations with siting and design. And I just can't highlight that enough. With our first Living Shorelines project at San Rafael in 2012, we didn't have such a standard process, and it took many meetings and a lot of discussion between different expertise in our multidisciplinary project team. We all know we have a lot of roles on these projects. There can be everything from funders and project managers to engineers, ecologists, landowners, natural resource managers, and regulators, and others, community members, who all want to give input and understand the design. And everybody can use different terminology, have maybe a different starting point, different understanding of the topics we're talking about. So this basis of design document has been a really important tool for discussion and to make sure that we're using consistent and clear terminology and that we're all on the same page as we capture decisions. So we've used that to advance the input and understanding with everyone on the project team. And then also this document really does focus on site selection, describing, how the site was selected, what are the existing conditions, and what are the engineering design criteria for the project. This has been really important in the absence of standardized National Society of Civil Engineers design criteria for nature-based projects. So having this type of document where we're doing that locally and able to discuss and share that criteria with others has been very important and helped to sort of expand the body of practice. We do use that to update the document regularly. Some people develop this draft of basis of design at a concept stage and then continue to update that through 10%, 30%, and even 60% designs. And it's a very valuable tool to share early with regulators to answer their questions and make sure that their considerations are included. And then number 5 says it becomes the basis for the project description that fully describes the project. And it also becomes the basis for the actual 100% plans and specifications that are developed in CAD and per a different format. And so some of the key components that are, I don't know why my pictures are over the text. I apologize to the group. This didn't happen on my screen. But some of the key components in the document are to clearly lay out the land ownership, which can be complex in subtidal and intertidal and nearshore environments. We can often have many landowners in a small space. It also helps to identify the project extents, the actual boundaries of the project in terms of where habitat elements are placed, where construction access and staging needs to occur, where monitoring access needs to occur. And then it also captures and describes site surveys that have occurred that have informed the design. So that might be RTK ground surveys, terrestrial surveys, bathymetric surveys, looking at depths across the tidal site, things like side scan, gathering habitat information via acoustic methods, if that's involved in the project, and other types of data like aerial photography, drone photography. So in one place, it's very helpful to describe any surveys that have been done pre-design or that are planned to be done during the project and during the monitoring. It also clearly describes the data used. We often refer to NAVD 88 as the baseline datum for these projects. That's roughly similar to mean low or low water, but adjusted for this location. We also describe the water levels, sea level rise projections that are helpful in understanding the basis of the design. And I can't overstate that enough. There are examples where there has been confusion between the project team on the exact datums used, and that can result in differences of inches or even feet of where elements are planned to be placed. There are examples where construction contractors have misinterpreted those datums and placed elements at slightly wrong elevations. And even if that's only a few inches, that might drastically affect your outcomes and success. So really important to capture and clearly confirm the datums for the project. The basis of design also briefly describes existing habitats, but we often describe the ecological information about the project in more detail in the project description itself. And the basis of design really does have more of an engineering focus. So it's briefly described, but not in high level of detail. And then we've also used this document to describe any modeling that's occurred in terms of wind and wave energy and our expected interaction with those elements, with the design elements in the project. What effect will things like plantings, nearshore reef elements, sediment placement, et cetera, what effect will that have on wind and wave energy and other physical forcing? We also describe the sediment types and shoreline geomorphology. And this can also include things like historic rates of erosion that may have been identified at the site, as well as expected future rates of erosion and how the design elements are planned to influence those, planned to reduce erosion in many cases. And then really key is to also describe and include in the figures utilities, which is a key component. This often can come up very late in design, things like PG&E lines or East Bay mud easements, which can have a really serious impact on where you might need to avoid excavation or have special consideration with your design construction. We also describe nearby communities, locations of parks, human communities, residential developments, industrial developments, and looking at considerations for noise, access, construction, visual features, et cetera. We also describe the cultural resources if they are present on the site, things like archaeological, Native American resources and sites. And then also work windows and timing and sequencing that are expected for the work. And then at the back of this document, it's really important to have at least a subset, a starting set of clear figures, which can include things like your overall project map, site photos of existing conditions, figures that describe the habitat elements in terms of spacing, orientation, and information about the description of each element. So in describing each habitat treatment, we actually had 7 treatments in the Giant Marsh Living Shorelines example. Many of you may have attended the June collaborative meeting that we had out at Heron's Head in person, which was great. And Eddie DeVita did a great job. Well, actually, Kathy Boyer, Eddie spoke about Heron's Head, and then Kathy Boyer, our lead scientist, did a great job of describing the Giant Marsh project and our overall goals and treatments. But we had 7 different treatments in this project, 3 different types of nearshore reefs that were in combination with plantings. So a reef in combination with eelgrass, a reef in combination with Pacific rockweed plantings, and then one in combination with native Pacific spartina. There are 2 reef types, so reef balls combined with shelled bags on top, and then a different type of element called oyster blocks. So we needed to describe those clearly. And then we had additional treatments with California sea blight plantings at the shoreline edge and upland ecotone plantings with about 10 species, 5 to 10 species at the upper edge. And so for each of these treatments, we walk through and had a section to describe the design guidelines for that treatment, the purpose of that treatment, the locations, the orientation to the shoreline and to trails and access, the arrangements, numbers and type of arrangement of each treatment and materials that were used. And then we also describe the anticipated response to wind and wave energy and also geomorphic response. Do we expect scour or sedimentation in different seasons? And what type of response do we expect physically, either on the bay floor, the benthic environment, or at the shoreline itself? We also describe construction techniques that were planned, different types of equipment, whether that be large equipment, barge and crane, for example, or small crews coming in and using hand trowels to plant native plants in the more terrestrial sections of the shoreline. And then also the sequencing of that treatment. We needed to come in and construct oyster reefs first and then add the plantings around them. If we did the plantings first and then came in with large equipment, we'd have a mismatch with possible impact. So describing that timing, the seasonal timing, the sequencing is very important to make sure that there's input from all parties and you're not overlooking something that could cause damage to one of your treatments. And then there's reference to the starting preliminary specifications. And that, ultimately leads into the construction documents. And I'll just call out that it's pretty, common that most projects use the 1997 Construction Specifications Institute standard. And I'd love to initiate a discussion on the modernization needed with that. There was not a lot of attention to nature-based components in traditional design planning. So even things like typologies, the type of notes that are included, the type of information, sometimes completely overlooks things like plant species or oyster reefs. And so would love to talk with this group and our engineering panel about ideas for how we might modernize that or suggest that. And then last, the document includes recommendations and next steps. For this project in particular, we needed to think about how we were going to fabricate those oyster elements because that's not a common practice locally. And also think about the installation and bidding strategy and make sure that the future plans and specifications all are compatible with the installation and bidding strategy planned, which can be very unique for placement of oyster reefs. We even looked into something like helicopter placement at the request of regulators. That was an interesting exercise. It was not cost effective or noise effective or anything to look at that, but a helpful exercise to compare that with something like barge and crane. So that's just a brief overview of some of the main components that are in the basis of design document that ESA prepared for this project with strong coordination with our full project team, which really included San Francisco State Estuary and Ocean Science Center, Chela Zabin and the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, Susan De La Cruz and the USGS Western Ecological Research Center, as well as Olafson Environmental, who was involved with the Spartina and upland ecotone plantings. So it really requires the full team, even though the engineers of the group put together the document. So I'd love to open it up for questions and input, especially asking how does your project team advance iterative design and capture decisions in a standard location? What challenges and solutions have you encountered? And really, what is on your wish list for better information sharing and capture so that the project is clear for the team as well as every other entity you might need to work with, including funders and regulators? So I think I'll stop sharing so that we can initiate that and really welcome folks to raise your hands or come off mute and share your thoughts on how you've done this for your own projects. Or if you have not initiated a project, what questions you might have.